to the spring, fetch me some water. You'd be my legs, my young granddaughter. You know I don't get around the way I used to. Won't you do for me the things I cannot do? Pin up my hair, there's company coming. We'd better get some biscuits in the oven. You know I'll fry this meat when I'm through. You set the table and I'll sing a song for you. Chief Redbird fell in the muddy water, and that's the last they heard of him. I lived my life by the banks of the river, but I never did learn to swim. Well, the wild geese fly and the coal trains rattle, and the time keeps passing on by. Me and the Redbird River are gonna roll on till we die. These apples here are good for frying. We'll peel the rest and put 'em up for drying. You know I can't stand to see 'em lay and spoil. Our winter's gain will be our summer's toil. Chief Redbird fell in the muddy water, and that's the last they heard of him. I lived my life by the banks of the river, but I never did learn to swim. Well, the wild geese fly and the coal trains rattle, and the time keeps passing on by. But me and the Redbird River are gonna roll on till we die. I used to fly across these hills and run barefoot through the spring. Thought I could see the whole world, Lord, and how I'd shout and sing. But my running days are over and my soul is almost free. Won't you go up on that mountain and sing one song for me? From these old breeches, now have a care and take some smaller stitches. It's something new from something old to keep us warm while the winter's cold. Chief Redbird fell in the muddy water, and that's the last they heard of him. I lived my life by the banks of the river, but I never did learn to swim. Well, the wild geese fly and the coal trains rattle, and the time keeps passing on by. Me and the Redbird River, me and the Redbird River, I said me and the Redbird River, gonna roll on till we die.
On the inside of her thigh.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Hyman Settlement School. For those joining us online and for all those here in the room, welcome to the first evening program of the 2021 Appalachian Riders Workshop. Everyone had a good day so far? Been great. Well, that is wonderful. We are so happy to be here tonight, and for everyone joining us here and wherever you're listening from. We have two wonderful readers to join us this evening. First, of course, Georgella Lyon, and Annette Clapsaddle. So before we introduce those folks and get our program started, I do have one small plug that I would be remiss if I did not begin with, and that is about Fireside First. So I want to take the opportunity to tell you about our new Fireside First book club. Some of y'all may have seen that mentioned vaguely in email communications and on our website, but we're officially rolling that out this week. And so what that is briefly, because I know you don't want to hear me talk and make a sales pitch to you, but I will for a moment, so you'll just have to indulge me. But what Fireside First Book Club is for our Fireside Industries literary imprint in partnership with the University Press of Kentucky. Of course, Annette is one of our authors. We are rolling out the Fireside First Club, meaning so every new book that comes out, starting this fall with Jane Moore Waldrop's Drowned Town and The Girl Singer by Marianne Worthington later this fall as well, you can sign up to receive these automatically shipped straight to your doorstep as soon as they come out, signed and possibly personalized if you choose, along with some other fun curated items that we'll collect from artists and local businesses. So it's a really wonderful program, I say as though we developed it, so it's wonderful. And we want you all to consider joining that. And so it's not, you can learn more about that on our website and you can sign up here. But the way we're trying to encourage that, and we want to reward folks that choose to join us in this inaugural week and launch, is we have a collection of books that are signed by our faculty this week. And so tonight, even though they didn't even know it, we've had several folks sign up already. And so we'll be giving away some signed copies of Even As We Breathe, Even As We Breathe, and several copies of George Ellis' works that we'll give away tonight as well. So we'll draw those at the end afterwards. And every night this week, we'll continue to give away more books. So the earlier you sign up this week, the more chances you'll have to take it home. And we have Adriana, our keynote speaker this week, has sent some wonderful signed gift packages as well. So we have 4 of those that we'll give away on Friday night. So you'll hear more about Fireside First throughout the week. But go online, Hyman.org/fireside, and you can learn about that, and also on our portal for the workshop as well. So that's the end of my sales pitch, and I will take a step back. So at this time, I'm going to ask John Lackey, one of our workshop participants who is with us this week, to come forward to introduce our first reader. And we will give him applause as he makes his way to the stage.
All right, I'm John Lackey, and Georgella has been given the same job description to which we all would do well to aspire, namely to light a few candles and search for those softly hidden handles that one uses to pull the world back in the right direction, using as her weapon the arts, books and broadside and song, because machine guns are too expensive and unwieldy, and they have a tendency to backfire. She will walk you through long-forgotten hallways where you will find what you have been missing. She will remind you of its shine, its smell, its sweet, dreamy heft. A creek that keeps flowing, a convergence and clairvoyance that know the limits of their banks, yet overflow them every so often just to let them know she was there. She has a musical ear, a visual music, a grasp of what it takes to console and inspire. Pardon my French in advance, but when I talk about her to somebody else who's familiar, one of us invariably says, "She's a badass," to which the other will respond without thinking, "Yes, yes she is." Former poet laureate of the great state of Kentucky, Georgella Lyon.
Let me know if you can hear me. Yeah? Okay.
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. We used to be neighbors when our boys were little, and John is a wonderful painter, carver, wood carver, does wonderful woodcuts, has done great posters for the Holler readings here, and other important endeavors. I thought I would start with a haiku. This is a pandemic haiku. I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're in lockdown, their husband teaches me how to cut up apples. Ah, all those wrong pies. Most of what I'm going to read tonight is from Back to the Light, my book that came out in April. But I want to start with something that has its roots in a poem I wrote in 1993, a poem called Where I'm From. And because it's a list form, you can do it over and over again as the years go by. And so this is one from and I would like to say that my Where I'm From took off from a poem of Joe Carson's, who also taught at this workshop, dear friend, and her poem took off from something somebody said. Where I'm from. I'm from the cries of families sundered at our southern border, while Lady Liberty faces a filthy sea. I'm from all white, able-bodied, well-off, hetero men are created equal. And here, Puerto Rico, have some paper towels. I'm from our predator-in-chief who brags about grabbing pussy and mocks a woman who was sexually abused. I'm from countries we bombed or clear-cut or destabilized to get what we wanted. I'm from the 7 deadly sins confused with the American dream. I'm from the whole Pilgrim whitewash, our refusal to admit the land we stole, the indigenous we slaughtered, the Africans we chained to build our wealth. I'm from their descendants, gunned down on the street. I'm from children ripped from their parents' arms when the ship docked, at the auction block, in the field. I'm from their blood and bones feeding the ground I stand on. So I'm sure a number of you have been or will be putting collections of poetry together. And I would just say that this one took many different forms and had different titles. And it was only when I realized that this first poem belonged in here did it begin to fall into place. So because I write for kids as well, I do a lot of work in schools. And I saw this little girl in the first poem. Little girl who knows too much, who in the 3rd grade is savvy and wary, whose face is her grown-up face, who would welcome dullness but can't afford it, whose innocence has been slammed into insolence. What happens at her house? Does she have a house? Does she have a father, a brother, a mother's lover who has forced on her this face? She's in the front row. I can't help but look at her. Even her clothes are uneasy. She questions my spiel about writing as a way to connect with your inside self, your story. And where would that get me, old woman? She seems to say. I've still got to do a lot of time as a child. I've got to try to save my outside self, as you so stupidly call it. Go home till you have something to say that helps. So this book is but before I can say that, I have to say what happened to me. And of course, saying it is part of what helps. One way to look at your life is to ask, what have I done with my breath? David Rubenstein. I held it. It went bad. I had it knocked out of me. I went in search of it, under my shoulders, above my belly, behind my heart. It was wary and held itself against me. I made promises. I'll welcome the swell of the belly. I'll praise you with open ribs. The breath sighed. I'll shout, I whispered. I'll ride your wave with a song. Go look in your story, breath said. That's where you left me. Body speaks. Could I be the title? I would like to be the title. Trade places with the head. If you want what's true. To steal yourself is to steal yourself. I will work with you. Will you? A skeleton wearing a suit of armor. What a waste of resources. You're like a head with its chicken cut off. Don't be afraid at the bottom of the breath. There's more where that came from. If you won't listen to pleasure, I will have to speak pain. Trauma enters unnamed places. It cannot get out by itself. I am with you through thick and thin. Your parents gave me to you, but now I'm all yours. Out with it. I'm telling you his name was fear, guilt, shame. I'm telling you his name. I'm saying what he did when I was just a kid. I'm saying what he did. He took me in his room, maple bunk bed tomb. He took me in his room. He was 12 and I was 5. I left my body to survive. He was 12. I was 5. I told my mama and I cried. She turned stony, said I lied. I told my mama, but she said I lied. I was 5 and she was grown, so I made her truth my own. I was 5 and made her truth my own. They were bigger than me, but I've labored to be free. Nothing's bigger than free. So I'm telling you his name was fear, guilt, shame. He was 12 and I was 5, and my mama said I lied. But they are gone. I am grown, and my truth is my own. Well, one of the things that helped was music, singing, listening, finding out that you can say things in songs that you can't. You can get away with saying things because you just can. It's a song. So this is, and I have so many friendships through music, and of course friends are a big part of what helps. So this is called Debut. Dusty velvet maroon curtain, you wait behind its pleated wall. guitar neck in your left hand, your best friend's hand in your right. You're 14, it's 1963, and the audience creaks the wooden seats of your high school auditorium, eager to see the football queen crowned and get back to the house. But they must sweat through entertainment first, including you and Joni debuting your folk act, thanks to Lemon Tree and Blowing in the Wind. You're both trembling like that windswept tree, breath held till your names are called. Then you step into Footlights Dazzle, all hope and high hearts. Somewhere in the universe, your voices still travel, a disturbance of air, your first song. One time at Heinemann, a number of years ago, Diane Gilliam and I taught together, and she's smaller than I am, so, and I'm short. She's even shorter, and so she said to me one day, you know, there are times when I just need to listen to a big loud woman, and I thought, well, me too. And so eventually this poem came out from that. If you don't know Diane's work, look for Kettle Bottom and Dreadful Wind and Rain. Some big loud woman. I need to listen to some big loud woman. Orangey red, wild-haired, her voice like a waterfall of kettles. Her head back, eyes shut, back arched to roar that music out. I need the brass and bramble of her low notes, the trembling windows of her high, bare feet planted on the floorboards, green dress, a summer canopy, the wail in one line, scar on the air. I need to listen to a big loud woman, heavy fists pounding my table, her anger, fire in the hearth. I need the avalanche of her laughter, the flood of her truth. I need to listen to some big loud woman. I need some big loud woman to listen to. And of course, falling in love and making a new family was part of what helped. And now I am a grandmother. And I wrote this poem for my daughter-in-law, Whitney. She's 6 months gone, in a family way, out to here. She's going to buy a baby. Got one in the oven, bigged. She's knocked up. She's expecting, eating for two, great with child. She's that slight, round, teenage, menopausal woman. She's that Goldilocks, kinky-headed, feather-braided, hidden-haired girl. She's that give her one cell in 9 months and she'll make a person. She's that woman who carried us all. And writers helped, of course. Writers I came to know, many of them at the Appalachian Writers Workshop. The writer who brought me there in the first place, Gurney Norman, who you'll be able to hear later in the week. The people he introduced me to, the people who made room for me, Jim Wayne Miller, who I got to be his assistant and learn so much about teaching as well as writing from him. Really, I've said before that I grew up as a writer at Heinemann, and I cannot imagine my life without the gifts that this workshop and all those spirits have given me. Besides, I got to wash dishes with Harriet Arnault. So, but one of the writers whose influence has gone so deep and continues is Virginia Woolf. And back when I was an academic, I did my dissertation on Woolf. But that was only so I could, that was so I could study her as much as I wanted to. So there are wolf poems in this book, but I'm going to read one that's not in the book because I wrote it afterward. And there's just always more. Thank God. So this is called You Can't Make This Stuff Up. Virginia Woolf was turning 100, and scholars planned a celebration at West Virginia University. The venue didn't strike me as odd, being from the mountains myself. But when I told people where I was going, almost all came back with some version of, West Virginia? You're kidding. Has anybody there even heard of Virginia Woolf? Finally, I snapped. This is West Virginia Woolf. That shut them up. Almost 20 years later, I traveled with my family to St. Ives, home of Woolf's childhood summers, strolling through narrow streets amid dazzling light, gull cries, and the ceaseless breathing of the sea. I was jolted out of my joy by a tableau in a storefront window. Seated mountaineer with overalls, slouch hat, rifle. At his side, the requisite hound and moonshine jug. Above the door, Hillbilly Arcade. Lord of mercy, children, it's Papaw Wolf. Really, I could not believe it. I've got a photograph. As I say, you can't make this stuff up. In an early pilgrimage to wolf places, my husband Steve and I went to Monk's house, her last home, and her country home for many, many years, and we walked down to the river, and I brought back a stone. So that's what this is about. Stone brought home from the river ooze. Was the stone you slid into the pocket of your coat before you stepped into the river, like the one I pulled from the water and carried in hand and suitcase and had to explain to the U.S. Customs inspector? It's a rock, I told him. Chert, flint and chalk. What underlies Sussex? What underlay your life? What in the end pulled you under? Just a rock, he says, and I nod. Looks like some sort of skull. I think of how 3 weeks later, kids found your body, how all their lives they were the ones who saw what the river made of you, how perhaps one day they read your words, heard your voice ring out beyond all loss. Mother, sister, father, brother, gone by your 26th year. The catastrophe of the First World War, the insanity of the Second. You, married to a Jew, living on the coast Hitler all but had his foot on. Sky black with bombers. London, your soul's map, nightly obliterated. The world's madness brought yours back, and so you walked into the river. You who wrote, against you I will fling myself unvanquished and unyielding, O death. Your words lift the stone from your pocket. See, I have it here. I didn't know, was not allowed to remember what had happened to me as a 5-year-old until long after this incident that I'm going to read about here. And then there's one more poem after this. This was 1981, I believe. I mean, we're talking the Carter administration. you know. And I think the first time I came to Hyndman was 1980. But anyway, they were having Appalachians to D.C., and they had preachers and musicians and poets, and all sponsored by the Smithsonian. And I got to read with Jim Wayne and Hollis Summers. So this is why I fell at the Folger Shakespeare Library. For decades, I've told the story how, impressed with myself, I bought foolish shoes for a big reading in D.C. How I tossed aside my rule, never wear shoes you can't run in, for bone, beige, leather, and suede, slightly heeled pumps. I've said that's why I fell on the intricate parquet stage, freeing poems to fly and requiring me on hands and knees to grope for salvation, her words, the bowl, stripped, before standing to make my way to the podium. I've laughed at my first line, at least that's over, and mocked my distress as I peered into dark and saw my parents had come. 9 hours they'd driven from Kentucky, only to witness the sprawl of an awkward daughter's pride. Then, at the reception, a family friend from my hometown came from behind, turned me, and kissed me on the cheek. "I'm living in Fairfax now," he said. "Sorry I was late and stumbled in." "You stumbled," I said, choking on Pinot Noir. My mother gave him a hug. I told the story, my downfall, my vanity, those shoes. The century would be gone before my mind knew what this neighbor had begun when he was 12 and I was 5. How his hand over my mouth, he'd forced me down. How he'd split my life. "Nobody will believe you," he'd said, and he was right. Who was I kidding, disguised as a poet, claiming that I had a voice? Just his approach, homing in on the Folger, would fling me to the floor, tear words from my hands, have me groveling right where he'd left me. But the hallelujah is I'm not there now. And there are more people I would thank than it's possible to do here, but I'm very grateful. Another thing that has helped me all my life is to be in the woods, to be in a tree, to be in a meadow, to be in the mountains, to know my connection to the living earth. I'm part of it. We're all part of it. We're all responsible for it. So this poem I wrote during the 2008 financial crisis. And I'll end with this one. The meadow does not know about the stock market. Today she is worth exactly what she was worth yesterday, a year ago, at creation. I don't mean property value, taxable assets. I mean milkweed and copper moths, honeybees, cowvetch, king snakes. Meadow life is not money. What rises and falls here are stems and flowers, leaves and fruit. No zigzag line of profit and panic, but the great wheel turning. Here God gives of her extravagance, and here, like Flicker, Viceroy, dragonfly, we come into our inheritance. Thank you. If I were there, I would go sit down, but I can't go sit down. Here we go.
All right. Thank you so much, Georgia. We ready, Corey? All right. Well, I'll introduce our next introducer, so that way they can introduce the next reader tonight. So Patricia Hudson is joining us virtually to introduce our next reader, who is here in person with us. So we are just truly embracing the hybrid format tonight, y'all. So Patricia.
Thank you. I'm Pat Hudson, and I'm talking to you from Knoxville, Tennessee. And Silas asked us to recall the first time we came to the Writers' Workshop, and for me, that was 1981. I was sent as a fledgling journalist to interview Harriet Arnault. And I thought it was such a magical place that I came back as a participant the very next year and have come back about 12 times now, I think. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Annette Clapsaddle, who hails from Western North Carolina and is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Annette and I are Facebook friends, and the photos she posts are a window into her deep love of the mountains, her husband and 2 sons, and the world of writing. But some of her most memorable posts are about mountain biking. She says, over 2 years ago, I took up the sport of mountain biking. I've been riding most of my life, but when I started hitting the trails, my riding transformed. And when Annette says she's hitting the trails, she means that literally. A remarkable number of her posts include photos of bloodied knees and battered bikes. And these photos are almost always accompanied by Annette wearing a gigantic grin, which tells you she's both incredibly tough and maybe just the tiniest bit masochistic. After one particularly gruesome crack-up, she posted, "Some people get tattoos and some people get scars. Scars are cheaper." But on a more serious note, she also has said, "Both my love of writing and my love of riding revolve around the appreciation of land, people, and the inexplicable interactions between nature and spirit." Annette teaches high school, and though she doesn't mention it often, she holds degrees from both William and Mary and Yale University. She could teach anywhere, but she chose to return home to Appalachia. One of her professors once told her, "When someone receives a world-class education, your primary goal should be to share it with as many people as possible." This week, Annette's sharing it here with us. So take it away, Annette.
Georgella has me nervous because I have heels on, so I was walking carefully up here. I'm so happy to be here for so many reasons, the same reasons that I see all the smiles up here. This is our community, and this community has changed my life, and that is not an overstatement. It has changed my life over the last few years since I've been involved with Hyman. So I want to thank you, Patricia, for the wonderful introduction. We were supposed, it was an Ethiopian food I think we were supposed to go get. During COVID, we talked about it about weekly, our plan to go, and then the restaurant closed. So we're going to have to come up with something else. Maybe we can eat together here because the food is so excellent. I Also, just want to say that, George Ella said that she likes to listen to a big, loud woman, so I think that may be why I'm here. I'll do my best. I also just want to thank Georgella for your words. You are an icon, and you've began the night in gratitude. And I just hope that I can continue that with what I have to share today. As has been mentioned, my first novel is a product of Fireside Industries and this special partnership Heinemann has with the University Press of Kentucky. And what was important about that for me is that from the beginning, from the workshop phase to publication, everyone at Heinemann, everyone at UPK understood the story that I wanted to tell and never wanted to change it, never wanted to give in to some of the typical stereotypical tropes that sometimes appear in Native literature. And so I have been eternally grateful for that. And that's what has really had me thinking about what I'm writing about in my next novel. So tonight I'm going to read from the work in progress, so bear with me, it is a work in progress. But I was thinking a lot about Cherokee origin stories and the values that are conveyed through everyone's origin stories, but also what happens when someone else tells our stories for us, and when we learn our culture from someone else's voice, which is laden with their own value system. So growing up, the best collection, or the most complete collection of Cherokee origin stories is from the James Mooney anthology. And what that means is that growing up, most of the origin stories I heard came from a book that a non-Cherokee person wrote. And there is always this discussion within our community as to how accurate that is and how often it may be influenced by James Mooney's values. As accurate as he was attempting to be in his research, where do his values come out of? So this novel that I'm working on is contemporary. It's set in Cherokee with a female protagonist. So this is a first for me. But I wanted to take our origin stories and pull out the values and lay them in present-day Cherokee, and how can we use them, and what does it mean when we can take those values back from the origin story. So each chapter actually begins with an epigraph from James Mooney's anthology, and later in the novel we'll speak to what that does. But so I'm just going to start from the beginning because Mandy told me just to start from the beginnings, and I do everything Mandy tells me. So. All right, so this is from current chapter 1. When the world grows old and worn out, the people will die and the cords will break, and let the earth sink down into the ocean, and all will be water again, from how the world was made. She hardly ever went barefoot anymore, not even in her own home, not since her youngest, Tuya, rounded out her belly and Lori curled his arms around her from behind, playfully announcing, "Just what I've always wanted, my woman in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant." But Maisie Taith, she had not taken his last name, couldn't deny that the slick wet of the morning grass felt right as it threaded its way between her russet toes, like her feet were finally rooted again. The clippings would be hell to pick off before she walked through her mother's screen door, keenly aware of the scolding that awaited her if she brought a mess inside. Still, the ground was much too soggy for even 2-inch heels, so she shed them onto the driver's side floorboard of her baby blue F-150 and braced herself as her feet sunk into the wet earth. Maisie checked the mail in the metal white box encased in discarded shitter pipes. Her daddy had welded it together the day after a bunch of kids took a baseball bat to it and scattered Publishers Clearinghouse teasers and Belk's preferred customer coupons from here to Kingdom Come. As was habit since she was a little girl, she was disappointed by the mailbox's emptiness. She paused to fully witness, appreciate a half-torn spider web and the glistening bits of rainbow trapped in the morning's condensation. This seemed to be the only real work that had been done on the farm in quite some time. Since her father had passed in 2016, 2 falls prior, Maisie's mother let the longtime farmhand go and subsisted on Social Security and a meticulously inventoried can house. Living just 15 minutes down the road, Maisie saw to it that her mother never wanted for a thing, not that her mother was prone to wanting things. The house before her was no longer white, though she couldn't remember when it had ever been pristine. It was as if it had tanned right alongside the family and workers in the field. Yellowed with the tobacco hanging in the barn. Fine lines wore both into its boards and the brows of the Taith family. Every time she stepped foot on the property, an ache set about her. She wondered how much it would cost to restore the old place, fix the missing boards, patch the roof, replace the roof altogether, update her aging mother's kitchen. Was it even worth it? "Mom," Maisie called alongside the screech of the screen door. "Where you at?" Her mother's white as the house, ball of knotted fuzz rescue dog bounded down the stairs. "Ah, Ushi, where's Mama?" She picked up the dog and held him against her chest. Something felt off in the house. None of the lights were on downstairs, and it was already past 8 in the morning. She didn't smell coffee or the wood stove. "Ma, you decent?" The coldness had already descended, swirled around her, and made its way out the screen door to mingle with the waiting morning fog. She knew. She knew even as she forced hopeful questions. She knew what awaited the open door to her mother's bedroom. We don't typically choose to breathe, but we can choose not to breathe in any given moment. We can repress our biological need for oxygen when we quiet our souls or dive beneath the water's surface, when we surprise our friend or keep her secret, or when we desire to remain suspended in a moment of love as we are too afraid that our breath will drive away the magic doing between touches. Our hearts, however, cannot elect to stop beating, or our skin cease feeling as we live. No matter how much we command, we cannot stall these compulsions. Maisie held that breath deep within her. Her heart still quickened into her throat, and her skin quivered into hot chills, beating with sweat. She gently sat Ushi down on the hardwood floor just before entering her mother's bedroom. There was no frantic screaming or shaking of her mother's rigid body. There was no pleading, no fainting. There was sickness that churned enough as she picked up the bedside phone. It seemed pointless to call 911, but it was easier to talk to a stranger in moments like these. It wasn't until she returned the phone to the receiver that she touched her mother. She curled her fingers around her mother's open palm, rubbing her own thumb along the lifelines. Her mother's hands were permanently calloused from the spring's broad leaves, though the last bundle of tobacco was hung to dry over 2 decades ago. Her skin had cured. Maisie, too, was hard-pressed clay, every slant a bending, stretching surrender of form. She had choice, perhaps, either to dry into brittle fragility or to drive against the assigned curvature of her maker. But how many girls know of choice before they are grown, still under the roof of another, still in the clothes sewn by 2 of those hands? Her childhood was bathed in smoke. Tobacco smoke, mountain smoke, clay firing smoke. Who can ever see clearly through all that smoke? However, there was no smoke coming from the chimney on this day. There would be no wood stove biscuits waiting. As she pulled her hand from her mother's, she felt herself, ever so slightly, stiffen, set. Ushi had followed her, but waited at the foot of the bed out of what appeared to be more of an indication of reverence than fear. When Maisie straightened, pulling the covers to her mother's shoulders, Ushi wound his way through her legs and leapt onto the bed, curling into a ball on her mother's stomach. Good boy, Ush. You stay here. I'll be back. Maisie retrieved her cell phone from the truck, and as she sat on the front porch waiting for an ambulance or police or who the hell ever showed up in moments like these, she dialed her husband at work. It occurred to her that as a nurse at the county hospital, Lori might actually be able to tell her who the hell ever was going to show up next. Regardless, her mother's body would most definitely be taken to the Cherokee Hospital, where bills would be covered without question. Maisie, you okay? You don't ever call. No, I'm okay. Kids are okay. It's Mom. Lori had been a nurse long enough to ask few questions, to read the silences, the catches in Maisie's throat. I'll pick up the kids, but I think we wait to tell them until after day camp. No sense pulling them out early. How else can I help? I wish I knew. Fuck, Lori. It's like when we had Jessie. Nobody thinks to send you off with a handbook, do they? No, they sure don't. There would be no siblings to call, none of hers or her mother's. How quickly emptiness came to a place. Once a refuge, often the only place Maisie could exhale when her and Lori fought, or work at the insurance agency weighted heavy, this place now felt like a vacuum, and she worried she might just as easily float into space, no longer tethered to her people. Maisie was alone on the porch of the house that was destined to be alone as well. Maisie had seen the will when her father passed, but thought little of it until this moment. It seemed sinful to think on things so soon. But the business of it all was an easy thread to grip. The house was hers or no one's. Ushi was most certainly hers now. She'd be haunted until the end of days if she ever gave up that mutt. She felt the roughness of the boards under her hands. The house, the farm, was in slow decay, had been for some time. It did not require action or emergency. Everything around breathed shallow and low. The property was a death rattle. It had been even when her father was alive. The ground still crunched despite spring rains, and now that they were deep into the summer months, all that awaited harvest was rebellious berries threaded on briars through rusted barbed wire fencing and the stubborn catfish minding mud in the overflow pond. It was tribal land, those acres of dust and brambles and forsaken hay sprawling out in front of her. So that meant two things. It was rare, and it was about to become one giant headache. As an enrolled member of the Eastern Band Cherokee, like her parents, she could own the land, leave it to her children, even sell it to another enrolled member or the tribe, but that was it. Lori could never own it outright. She couldn't sell it for the price it was actually worth to a non-tribal member. There was an expectation with such land. You keep it in the family or you sell it out for the big bucks to the tribe. Keeping a farm this size in the family and trying to make a go of it meant bankruptcy. Selling it, especially since it was far from the gaming epicenter, likely meant watching her home turn into a hastily constructed government buildings of strips of cookie-cutter tribal housing, a slow burn toward sadness in every direction. No real bank would loan her the money she would need to get the farm working again. Hell, she didn't even have anyone to help her, and finding manual labor these days was nearly impossible, especially for a non-functional farm. Maisie, remembering her days as a young child on the property, had a moment of consideration. until she realized she might very well be confusing her own memories with that of a half-dozen Hallmark movies. She was no 30-something single mother saving the family farm by sheer grit and ingenuity, all while falling in love with a hunky farmhand who wanders into town. She was 40 and married. This would be impossible. And I think I've got time for just a little bit more, so I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory, and then I'll read this other section so it'll make sense. So one of the origin stories for the Eastern Band is about the original people. So the corn mother named Shailu and her spouse, her mate, Kanati, who is the lucky hunter. So Shailu is responsible for providing all produce, literally sheds it from her body, and Kanati is the hunter and fisherman. And as the story goes, and there are multiple versions, they had one son, and then one day this figure that Mooney refers to as Wild Boy is spawned from the blood of wild game that Kanati has killed and is cleaning in the river. And so Wild Boy kind of comes into existence and befriends Shailu and Kanati's son, and convinces the son to go spy on Shailu when she goes to produce corn and beans and squash. And so they catch her doing this, sloughing these things from her body, and they accuse her of being a witch. This is according to Mooney's version. And have obviously decided to kill her for this, right? So Shailu recognizes her fate and lays out these steps that the boys must follow, that must drag her body in a certain direction a certain amount of times, and this leads to our planting season for corn for the rest of life, right? I've always been fascinated with this story because it's, first of all, horrific, because I have 2 boys and I worry. But also, it is very much a martyr story, and that is not in line with our value system, Cherokee value system. So I wonder about that story a lot and the way that it's conveyed in Mooney's anthology. So I've been thinking about that a lot, and really wanted to think about Maisie and some of her choices she'd have in 2021 as this type of figure. But I also, love this Wild Boy character, and a young man who comes into their life. So this is just a real short section that I'll finish up with, because I want to introduce you to this character. His first appearance, and though he's unnamed in this chapter. And then also I should say that there is a figure in Cherokee stories called Uktana, which is this great horned snake that lives in the river, has a diamond pattern on his head. Coincidentally, speaking of mountain biking, there is one of the trails that I wreck the most often on is called Uktana. I don't think it's coincidental. You'll get some of the imagery from this section. So it starts again with a quote from Mooney. When he reached Cherokee country, he was very tired, and his wings began to flap and strike the ground. And wherever they struck the earth, there was a valley, and where they turned up again, there was a mountain. It's from How the World Was Made. The agitated silt swirled up from a rocky riverbed, concealing the totality of the emerging form, until his slick, ruddy head breached the surface of the cold, otherwise still, Oconaluftee waters. Specks of mica and sand sparkled like a crown of gemstones across his forehead, collecting in an unmistakable diamond centerpiece. A hiss of white mist spewed from his mouth, fading instantly into the blanket of early morning fog. Standing remarkably steady amidst the moss-slicked stones, water shed from his body in the shingle sheath. He blinked into the sunlight. He grasped mossy rocks sliding over the curves until reaching the bank, nesting his bare feet into divots, balancing on jutting rocks and pulling his wet body into the waiting weeds. The infant leaves of river cane flickered in front of him, obscuring his view to any man-made path. He lay there for a moment, inhaling the dank soil, intermittent waves of honeysuckle carried on a soft wind. He was alone again, by want or will or waste, but he would not remain this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette. Well, our evening is drawing to a close, but before we do, I promised we would pull out some names for some books. So, and some people took us up on the opportunity to subscribe this evening. So wonderful. So Jordan's going to come up and pick out. We're going to give away some copies of Back and Catalpa, a set of each from Georgella, and then we're going to give away a copy of Even As We Breathe. Signed by Annette. So Jordan's going to do the magic. Hopefully, I know people here can see him. There's nothing shady happening, so we have a live audience. Yeah. Kathy Lintis is going to get a copy of Back and Catalpa. We'll do one more set of that. One more. And where will we write this down to? Tia Jensen. She's there in the room. Tia, we'll get that. Of course, Georgia, we'll get all this information to you. And then we're going to give away a copy of Even As We Breathe. And so one more name tonight. The suspense. Pamela Hirschler, one of our last subscribers right this evening. So congratulations, everybody. We'll get those mailed to you or picked up in person. Thank you so much. We are adjourned. 5 books in the back of the room.